Ethan Carter tightened his grip on the leash as the cool night breeze rustled through the empty suburban street. The world was quiet except for the rhythmic tapping of Jake's paws against the pavement, his sleek German Shepherd frame moving in perfect sync with his owner's steady pace. The streetlights buzzed softly, casting elongated shadows across the cracked sidewalk. It was supposed to be a peaceful night walk, until Jake suddenly stopped. Ethan felt the tension in the leash before he saw what caught Jake's attention. The dog's ears stood erect, his body tensed, muscles coiled like a loaded spring. His deep brown eyes locked onto something or someone ahead. Ethan followed his gaze and saw a figure staggering along the edge of the sidewalk, barely illuminated by the dim glow of a flickering streetlight. The man looked out of place in this quiet neighborhood. His clothes were torn, his face gaunt, and his movements unsteady, as if exhaustion or pain weighed him down. Ethan's instincts, sharpened from years of military service, immediately kicked in. Something wasn't right. "Come on, boy," he murmured, tugging at the leash. But Jake wouldn't budge. Instead, he growled, a low, warning sound that sent a shiver up Ethan's spine. Then, without any further hesitation, Jake broke free. Ethan barely had time to react before the leash snapped from his fingers. The dog shot forward, his powerful legs carrying him toward the stranger at alarming speed. "Jake, heel!" Ethan commanded, his voice sharp with authority. Jake ignored him. The man barely had time to register what was happening before Jake reached him. But instead of attacking, the dog stopped abruptly in front of him and pressed his nose against the man's leg, sniffing frantically. Then, to Ethan's utter shock, Jake whined, a strange, almost pleading sound. The man swayed unsteadily, his breath ragged. His eyes flickered between Jake and Ethan, filled with something that looked an awful lot like recognition. He knows," the man rasped, barely above a whisper. His voice was hoarse, like someone who hadn't spoken in days. Ethan approached cautiously, keeping his hand near the concealed knife in his jacket. "You all right, buddy?" he asked, keeping his tone measured, controlled. The man took a step forward but faltered, his body failing him. Ethan caught him before he could hit the pavement. His fingers brushed against something cold and metallic tucked inside the man's torn jacket, a chain. When he looked closer, he realized what it was. A military dog tag. His stomach tightened. Jake remained unmoving, his body pressed protectively against the stranger's side. The dog's unwavering presence sent an unsettling feeling crawling up Ethan's spine. Jake had never behaved this way before, not toward a stranger. "Who are you?" Ethan demanded, his voice now laced with suspicion. The man's breathing grew shallower. He tried to speak, but only managed a few strangled words before his body collapsed entirely against Ethan. "Damn it," Ethan muttered, shifting his weight to keep the man from hitting the ground. He had no choice. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. Jake whined again. His eyes flickered up to Ethan's, almost desperate. Ethan had seen that look before. Not from a dog. From soldiers. The ones who knew they didn't have much time left. "Hang in there, buddy," he muttered to the unconscious man as the distant sound of sirens grew louder. Minutes later, an ambulance pulled up, the red and blue lights slicing through the darkness. 2 paramedics rushed out, moving with practiced efficiency. "What happened?" one of them asked as they loaded the man onto a stretcher. "Not sure," Ethan replied, glancing down at Jake, who still refused to move from the man's side. "Found him like this. He might be ex-military. He's got a tag." One of the paramedics checked the man's pocket. No ID. No phone. Just the dog tag. Then, just as they were about to lift him into the ambulance, the man's hand shot out. His fingers latched onto Ethan's wrist with surprising strength. His eyes, barely open, locked onto Ethan's. The next words he spoke sent ice through Ethan's veins. "They're coming, and he's the only one who can stop them." Then, his grip went slack. Ethan stood there, heart hammering against his ribs as the paramedics loaded the man into the ambulance and drove away. The wailing sirens faded into the night. Jake sat beside Ethan, still staring down the street as if expecting something, or someone, to appear. Ethan had a sinking feeling the night was far from over. The rhythmic clicking of Jake's claws against the wooden floor was the only sound in Ethan's dimly lit living room. The dog paced near the door, ears twitching at every passing car, every distant sound. He was waiting, anticipating. Ethan sat on the couch, phone in hand, staring at the only clue he had, the dog tag. He ran his thumb over the engraved letters. M. Grayson, U.S. Army K-9 unit. There was no serial number, no blood type, no official markings that identified rank or division. It was strange, too strange. He had spent the last 2 hours trying to find out if a soldier named Grayson was missing, wounded, or even discharged. There was nothing. No records. It was like the man didn't exist. Jake let out a low whine, snapping Ethan out of his thoughts. The dog had settled beside the door, head resting on his paws but eyes still locked on the entrance. Waiting. Ethan exhaled and rubbed his temples. His gut told him this wasn't over. He wasn't wrong. A sharp knock shattered the silence. Jake's head snapped up, his body immediately shifting into alert mode. A deep, warning growl rumbled from his chest. Ethan stood and moved toward the door, his pulse quickening. He glanced through the peephole. 2 men in suits, no badges, no identifying features, just crisp, dark suits and unreadable expressions. Ethan kept the chain lock in place as he cracked the door open. "Yeah, Mr. Carter?" The taller of the 2 men spoke, his voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "We need to ask you a few questions." Ethan didn't move. "About?" The shorter man stepped forward. "About the man you found tonight." Ethan's grip on the door tightened. His stomach knotted. No one should have known about that yet. The hospital would still be running tests. "How do you know about him?" Ethan asked, his voice controlled, unreadable. The taller man's smile was tight, almost forced. "We have our sources." Ethan's instincts screamed at him. Something was wrong. These weren't cops. They weren't military either. "I don't know who you are," Ethan said, keeping his stance firm, "but if you're looking for the guy, he's at the hospital. You can talk to him there." A pause, too long. Then, the shorter man let out a slow exhale, reaching into his jacket. "That's unfortunate, Mr. Carter." Ethan's muscles tensed. He was ready to move, but before he could react, Jake lunged. The German shepherd slammed into the door, barking viciously, teeth bared. The force rattled the frame, catching the men off guard. Ethan took the opening. He slammed the door shut and threw the deadbolt in place. The men outside hesitated for only a second before pounding on the door. "That was a mistake, Carter." Jake continued barking, his body rigid, stance wide, guarding the entrance like his life depended on it. Ethan's mind raced. If these men were willing to show up at his house in the middle of the night, they weren't just looking for answers. They were cleaning up loose ends. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. Ethan hesitated, then answered. "Who is this?" A ragged breath on the other end. Weak. Strained. Then, Grayson's voice. "They're coming for me," he whispered. "Don't let them take me." The line went dead. Ethan grabbed his keys. "Come on, Jake." The dog didn't need to be told twice. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white. The rain drummed against the windshield in relentless sheets, making the road ahead a blur of shimmering reflections. Jake sat rigid in the passenger seat, his ears flicking at every sudden movement, his body coiled like a spring. The hospital was still miles away. But something gnawed at Ethan's gut. A bad feeling. Grayson's words echoed in his head. "Don't let them take me." Who were they? The men in suits? A government agency? A rogue faction? And why was a military dog so devoted to this man? Ethan exhaled sharply. He was in way over his head, but backing out wasn't an option. Not anymore. The traffic light ahead turned red. Ethan eased to a stop, his fingers still twitching against the wheel. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. A black SUV, unmarked. No headlights. It had been behind him for the last 3 turns. His heart rate spiked. Jake let out a low, warning growl, confirming Ethan's suspicions. The light turned green. Ethan pressed the gas, smoothly accelerating. He needed a plan, fast. A hospital wasn't exactly the best place to shake a tail. Too many eyes, too many exits. If these people wanted Grayson silenced, they wouldn't hesitate to go through anyone in their way. A side street appeared up ahead. Narrow, unlit, leading into an old industrial district. A dead zone. No cameras. No witnesses. Ethan made a sharp right. The SUV followed. No hesitation. Ethan's pulse pounded. He pressed the gas harder, weaving between the few parked cars lining the street. The SUV matched his every move. Jake shifted in his seat, his hackles raised. The road narrowed further. At the end of the street was an abandoned warehouse, its massive doors rusted, windows shattered. A perfect place to end this chase on his terms. Ethan yanked the wheel hard left and spun into the warehouse's loading dock, tires screeching. He slammed the brakes and killed the engine. The SUV skidded to a stop just outside. Ethan's breath was slow, measured. The storm outside masked all other sounds, but he felt them, moving, shifting in the darkness. Jake's muscles tensed. He was ready. The SUV's doors opened. 2 figures stepped out. Ethan reached under his seat, fingers curling around the cold steel of his father's old .45. He never carried it, not until tonight. The men moved cautiously, their silhouettes framed by the rain. "Mr. Carter," one of them called out. The same smooth voice from before. Ethan remained silent. "No need to run. We just need the dog." Jake bared his teeth. "The dog." Ethan's grip tightened. "You're not taking him." A long pause. Then the man sighed. "That's unfortunate." A gun cocked. But before Ethan could react, Jake lunged. Chaos erupted. A snarl, a scream, a gunshot, then silence. Ethan's breath was ragged. He scrambled to his feet, his heart hammering. One man was down. The other was gone. Jake stood over the motionless figure, his fur bristling, teeth bared. Ethan didn't waste time. He grabbed Jake's collar. "Come on." The hospital could wait. They had bigger problems now. Ethan's breathing was ragged as he sprinted through the warehouse's back exit, Jake at his side. Rain pelted them in icy daggers, but he barely noticed. They had to disappear. The SUV was still idling outside, its engine a low growl beneath the storm. The man Jake had taken down wasn't moving, but Ethan wasn't about to check for a pulse. There was no time. His truck was compromised. If they had trackers, or worse, reinforcements, he couldn't risk it. Instead, he cut through the alley, boots splashing through ankle-deep puddles. A safe house. He needed a safe house. Asterisk asterisk. Jake trotted beside him, his ears swiveling at every sound. The dog wasn't just alert. Asterisk asterisk, he was anticipating something. Asterisk asterisk. Ethan clenched his jaw. He had trusted his instincts all his life, but now? Now, he was trusting Jake's. The city loomed ahead, a maze of flickering streetlights and distant sirens. They weren't safe yet. And then, just as Ethan rounded a corner, Jake stopped. Ethan skidded to a halt. The dog's hackles were raised, his body rigid. He was staring at something in the darkness. Ethan followed his gaze. A figure stood beneath a flickering street lamp. Soaked. Still. Waiting. Ethan's fingers twitched toward his gun. Jake, however, didn't growl, didn't bare his teeth. He whined. The sound was small, barely audible. But it was enough. Ethan's grip on the gun loosened. The figure stepped forward. And then... Grayson. The man lifted his head. Grayson. Not in a hospital gown. Not weak, delirious. Awake. Aware. Standing. Asterisk asterisk. Ethan's pulse hammered in his throat. This wasn't possible. He had left Grayson at the hospital. Hadn't he? Ethan, Grayson's voice was steady despite the cold. Despite the impossible. You need to listen to me. Ethan shook his head, stepping back. No. You. His eyes darted to Jake. You were dying. Grayson's expression was unreadable. I know. The storm howled around them. The street lamp buzzed and flickered. Jake sat between them, his tail still, his body tense. And then Grayson spoke again, his voice quiet, certain. I wasn't supposed to survive. The words sliced through Ethan's thoughts like a blade. He had known something was wrong. The unmarked cars. The men in suit. The way Jake had refused to leave Grayson's side. None of this was an accident. Who were they? Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Grayson exhaled. People who made a mistake. Ethan's grip on his gun tightened. Grayson met his gaze. And now they're going to fix it. A sharp crack split the air. A sniper's shot. Jake barked, a warning, a plea, before shoving Ethan back. Ethan hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. The world tilted, rain hammering down. He twisted, eyes darting toward Grayson. But he was gone. Only the flickering street lamp remained. Jake stood over Ethan, panting. Waiting. Watching, ****. And Ethan knew. This wasn't over.